Hi, I'm Larry Dignan with Constellation Insights, and we're here with Raj Sundaresan. He's CEO of Altimetrik, and we're going to talk about enterprise AI architecture, optimization traps, and the need for multiple models. Hi, Raj. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks for having me here.
So, you penned a blog post where you were talking about architecture and enterprise AI, and kind of ways to not be boxed in. So I guess walk me through the general theory of just creating an architecture that won't lock you into models and all that.
In the day and age of AI, it so happens that everybody wants to jump into solutions and impress the board with some enablement through experiments or POCs, and they're missing out this big thing around architecture. I mean, architecture is basic. Any construction, any building you need to have a well-defined architecture, especially given the investment the enterprises are doing and bringing in AI into the mix. The last talked about thing is really architecture, and so I think and hence what I feel is a lot of people are prematurely optimizing a lot of things before even thinking about what the architecture should be and how things have to be built. So if I step back and think really what the architecture has to think through is, given any enterprise, they have a lot of already running systems which are in great shape in some cases needs a lot of work to be done to modernize it. But bringing in AI into that mix is not just defining architecture, but it's also how do you adapt to the existing architecture, this new thing about AI. So for us, as practitioners, as Altimetrik, we come in, and that's what we really do, is to think through, what is the existing landscape for an enterprise, and how do you bring anything new into this organization. Right now, we're talking about AI, so we start thinking that way and building it. And that one of the key things which we have to think through in any architecture, leave alone the volume and the stress and all of that it has to take on. One thing is all around optionality as well. In enterprises, you don't want to lock into technologies where you're going to be stuck with for that forever. So you should think through that, and that to me is important, big step. And this happened in multiple times. I mean, think about databases. There's optionality of applications to go to multiple databases. You don't want to get stuck to that. If you fast forward to cloud, you got to have an architecture. You support multi-cloud, and you should be able to, balance workloads across clouds. And this is the right types of things you need to think about, not only for, not from an optionality, but as also from a resiliency perspective, that you have multiple cloud. Similarly, when you think about AI and models, you need to have real good optionality built into the architecture to choose the right model for the right workload and the right decision. And that is what I was trying to pose on, and we could talk a little bit more about in the minds of how that
Uh,
should be thought through, and how that kind of connects back to what a lot of these frontier models already have built in, and kind of in a walled garden versus in an open way of thinking your architecture.
would you say architecture has been overlooked with AI?
I would. I mean, that's exactly what's making the point when I was opening, is that it's this nice and cool thing that people want to just jump in and come up with things which they want to go impress the board or the CEO with, hey, we are able to solve this. And that happens in isolation, and it's great in isolation. But if you want to bring that all together for production scale with an enterprise, that's when it breaks down. And that's where the whole thing around how do you bring in this new way of thinking from a large language model, be it context, be it orchestration, be it governance, how does it fit within your existing architecture? So holistically looking at it and stepping back, and that architecture piece today is a little bit overlooked at, and that also includes the optionality piece, which was what I was mentioning about too.
So walk me through what an optimization trap is.
Look, the optimization trap to me is you jump in prove something and say this is the, and since it works in an area, you invest a lot more in that same area, expecting your outcomes to be really what your outcomes should be, and really driving your business drivers. That's not always the case, because at the end of the day, your input should not be a measure for, and what you invest in the input should not be a measure for what your outcomes should be. And what that is what we are seeing right now. And I would say automation trap, or the anti-patterns, what we are seeing and this has happened in the history. We can go through multiple examples, but really pointing out on the recent occurrences, what we call it as token being the over optimization done in the input stream, right? So thinking about tokens, just increasing the number of tokens, increasing the context window is not going to get you what outcomes you need, right? So that is, to me, is what the industry is realizing today, and what they've termed it called token maxing. And then we have heard from Microsoft, we heard from Uber, and specifically in the coding area of the LLMs, where there have been enough examples where the engineers are given a leaderboard and to max tokens, and hoping that your outcomes are going to drive your business needs. But that doesn't happen usually, right? I mean, the amount of code you generate is not always proportional to the business implication it has. The PR, as well as the lines of codes, is not a measure of a business success. So to me, that's an optimization trap. And then that is leaning into a mode where the enterprises are now squeezing and thinking through on what the outcomes should be, and what types of how do you more optimize your token usage. And then comes your FDEs and your frontier model companies, having this deploy cost to bring in this forward deployed engineers to help enterprises to go build certain things. And again, there's a direct proportional, it's directly proportional to the number of tokens they use, because the FDEs come in, help the enterprises in an area to show not just what's on the slide deck, but really put something to work, some workable code in a certain area. And that is really coming in, optimizing for what the large language model needs, or the frontier model needs, rather than wearing the hats of what does the enterprise need from a longer term perspective. So that, to me, is the gap where you would see that the experiments and the prototypes and the things which the FDEs build is not able to be scaling in the production environment, and multiple reasons, as I was touching. So,
do you think FDEs are a value trap if they come from a neutral firm, or do you think they're a value trap because they come from a frontier model? How should a customer think about FDEs?
There is a role for FDEs, which these frontier labs are investing in, right? So there is a gap between strategy and scale, and that is really proving that the strategies could be roadmap and could be executed on. And that's what these FDEs from frontier labs could come in and prove quickly, that here's what the art of possible is. And this is what Ray was mentioning in his code, as well as really displacing or offsetting what the consulting companies would do, rather than on a piece of paper or a PowerPoint deck. These folks would leave some workable code with some demonstrable piece of work, which they could take it and say, yes, the art of possible is now proven in an isolated environment. And that is where I believe the next set of FDEs would be from scale organization, which are companies like Altimetrik would come in and take it on from there and really help scale to production. That's where the whole thing around, how does it fit to the existing architecture of the enterprise? What tweaks need to be done to the architecture to bring in this new formed experiment to be scaled in production. So those are the things which we would come in and help. So I would say there's two types of FDs. One is from the set of the frontier labs who are, and that is where you don't want to max that frontier lab FDEs. They're there for a reason. They do that out of possible, and then and companies like ourselves will come in and help take it to the next level because we have that industry domain expertise. We have built a production grade software for our enterprises, and really, and we have built things in a brownfield environment, and we've modernized that. So we bring those expertise together to take it to the next level.
Are enterprises thinking through that brownfield model? Or is it they're just chasing some new thing in a vacuum? I mean, I think we're getting there now where enterprises seem to be putting things together. But, it seems like we've had 2 years thinking we had greenfield when we didn't.
No, I think that's enterprises are realizing that they cannot just have an AI office somewhere centralized thinking about AI rather than ingraining them in the entire organization, right? If you do that, you're not thinking about the brownfield, right? The AI office just does this in isolation, and that's what fails miserably when you have to scale because you're not really thinking about the backdrop of the architecture you have within your enterprise. So I think the enterprises are realizing that now it is like the AI CIO that's combined, the role is combined so that you think full stack now about how does this AI solution this FD is developing would fit it in the organization. That's where the whole holistic view of the brownfield comes in, and that view is now taken. And that was a blocker for not taking it to production, was that you build it in isolation, not thinking about how does it fit within your existing architecture. And that realization has come in, and there was a good air pocket where enterprises was battling, saying, "Hey, I'm, spending so much on tokens and nothing comes out at the end of the day, and where is the business case for me to take it back?" And I think that enterprises are realizing now, and then they're looking at companies like Altimetrik, where we think holistically how AI needs to be brought into enterprise from a brownfield perspective. What we call it as Alti AI OS, which is not that you just patch certain things within your architecture. You have to think it holistically, right from experience to context to orchestrations to governance to substrate, which includes observability and everything else. And that's the reference architecture we help for enterprises, and we help that reference architecture to be built within their organization. It's not a product or a platform we sell. It's an architecture reference which we take it to our clients and see where there are gaps, and we fill that in and help build that so that AIs could be brought in a holistic manner.
And your approach is multi-model. So what's the importance of having a mixture of models approach?
Look, I think I'm overextending, I would think, from a mixture of experts, which is pretty much in the neural network machine learning, where within a model you could have an orchestration which distributes the decision to multiple experts and then brings in the outcome and says which is the right one, and that similar thing could be extended when you think about models, right? You need to have for certain workload or decisions, you want to have a certain type of or a certain large language model which you want. So I would say the mixture of models is that you should have control within your architecture where you're able to orchestrate your request based on the decision you're expecting to a frontier lab model or an open weighted model or a small language model or a deterministic machine learning whatever algorithm. So you should be able to do that, and for that you really need to have some level of orchestration and some level of judgment needed and some level of learning needed, and that all needs to be built in within the architecture, because when you're sending in a request for a decision from one of these models, you should be able to judge whether that is but that judgment comes from the organization's knowledge. That whole knowledge loop is what trains this judgment model, which judges which is the right model, so that learning loop happens. And that's what I said, that learning needs to be built into the architecture. So as this as more and more of these requests comes in, you're auto tuning to get to the right efficient model to bring back the decisions, which is very relevant for what the enterprise are looking for. Because that's where the optimization trap comes in. Because if you plumb everything to one model, and then you're just stuck, because it might be a great model, but that's not what you want for a request, which really could be done by a deterministic, rules-based engine, right? Why would you want to sell it to a model and pay through your nose for the tokens? So that level of control you need to have, and that's what we call the control plane, which has this orchestration, judgment, as well as the learning. And the learning loop is the alpha for an enterprise, and that should be something the enterprise should own, rather than everything being built within a model. So you don't want all of your knowledge and your knowledge loop and your alpha in a walled garden of a model. Rather have that optionality to switch, and more, where you really need to get to a frontier model, you have that option. Where you need to have a lot more privacy and security and want to host something in your data center or private cloud, you go get your open weighted model, and you could route to that, or really get to a small language model, which is very specific to your industry. So that kind of routing options you need to have. And that's what I kind of overextend the mixture of experts. And I know the guys who are, in MOE type of who have come up with, will say I'm overextending. Yes, but the message here is that we should also start thinking about mixture of models, which is beyond experts within a model. You're now looking holistically, multiple models, multiple experts, and some level of judgment and learning happening and orchestrating based on that.
So if you were to allocate, I mean, I kind of look at the mixtures of experts and different models almost like a portfolio. What would if you take an average enterprise, what should be weighted for open weight models versus frontier versus small models? I guess how should you think about that? Like, what should your portfolio look like of models?
In a large enterprise, there is need for all of those, right? You need frontier models for really solving something which is very generic and you very general, which that level of the chain of thought needs to happen, that level of reasoning needs to happen, that level of bigger context window needs to be passed. Yes, then you need to get onto the frontier models. But when there is the need for the models which need not be that general, but also you're concerned about the regulation and you want your alpha to stay within your learning loop to be not shared with these frontier models. Then you want to go open weighted models, which are hosted within your data center, your private cloud, and a very many regulated industry. That's probably the way they would want to look at it and want to go with it. And then a lot more need for a small language or a domain specific model, because say for example in an industry like an insurance and a function finance, they do not want any of the finance information to get away, let alone outside, not even to other departments. So they want that small language model tuned to the industry, insurance industry, but very, very specific for the finance department. So that level of small language models and domain level models would be needed. And there are multiple use cases. You don't really need large language model at all. Those are rules based or just machine learning or neural network type of thing. So you need to have that optionality. And I think I would not prescribe this. This is the portfolio of mix you should have. It's based on the need, Larry, and it could go weighted all the way to LLMs when you're starting. As you mature, things can go the other way to open weighted to small language and things. Then you get started with a frontier model, and then you start distributing your load based on what you learn and what your judgment model becomes and what you're learning based on the judgment you're making, and your orchestration happens. So I think that's how the portfolio will build out.
So, what are the two primary optimization traps you see out there right now?
One is token maxing, which we have seen and the industry has realized, and a lot of enterprises are talking about it. Example being Microsoft and Uber, which we're publicly talking about how this is an optimization trap for them. And based on that, now I see a trend, which I'm framing it called FDE maxing, which is a forward deployed engineers, where the frontier labs are creating companies called DeployCos, which are hiring FDEs and maxing those FDEs in enterprise is not going to get you production grade implementation. You need to think through a lot more from an architecture perspective and how that fits your broadfield reality within an enterprise. So that's the FDE maxing. That's the second optimization trap I talk about.
All right. Thanks for joining us, Raj.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Larry.